So, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Claudio, for the introduction. Thank you also to the organizers for inviting me to be here and also for giving me the opportunity to show you some of our recent results. So, as Claudio said, my name is Nuno Araujo. I come from the Center for Theoretical and Computational Physics at the University of Lisbon. And for today, I decided to talk about something that I've recently started to work on, that is self-folding Kirigami, where the idea is to find strategies to obtain three-dimensional shell-like structures from folding two-dimensional templates. And these templates consist of panels that typically are rigid panels connected through flexible hinges. And I'm particularly interested in understanding how this occurs at the micro scale, so the sizes of the panels are of the order of the micron. And at that scale, fluctuations are important, so the process is stochastic in nature, and this raises many interesting theoretical questions, as I will show to you today. So just before I start talking about folding, and just since the idea of this seminar is to introduce ourselves, I would like to give you a brief idea of the type of problems that I've been working on. So I joined the Portuguese group in Lisbon in 2014, and since then I've been working in the collective dynamics of particles in complex environments, and here I would like to highlight three different words. The first one is collective, so I'm interested in describing phenomena that typically emerge from the particle-particle correlation. And these systems are typically driven out of equilibrium, so it's important not only to look into the correlations, but also the way that they develop in time, so dynamics is important. And I'm mainly looking to systems that are affected by the presence of fields, interfaces, or surfaces, and that's why I put environments there. In terms of particles, we have been looking to the self-assembly of colloidal particles and granular matter. In colloidal particles, we have been mainly looking to the aggregation of colloidal particles that interact with some kind of anisotropy that can come from the presence of patch on the surface of the colloid or an anisotropy in shape. And in the case of granular matter, I've been mainly looking into electrostatics of granular matter and trying to understand, for example, how you can generate strong electromagnetic fields in, due to the multiple collisions between grains in fluidized particle beds, especially when the particles are identical in size, shape, and chemical composition. We have been also looking to other types of self-organization, folding, as I will discuss with you today, but also active grow, and here we are mainly interested in understanding the cell division and proliferation on flat substrates and also on three-dimensional scaffolds. So in short, we look to soft condensed matter physics problems, and for that we combine ideas and methods from statistical mechanics and computational physics. Regarding folding, if you look into nature, you'll find many examples of systems where nature has developed some kind of strategy based on folding in order to perform some kind of biological activity. The simplest example is probably the opening of seed pods, or as you can see in the case of a pine cone. And this is typically triggered by some kind of external stimulus, like for example, change in humidity or change in temperature. But you can also see more complex examples, for example, the case of the earwigs. These are insects that stay most of the time under the ground, and so they develop a strategy of folding and unfolding the wings. And what is interesting is that this folding is very efficient. In the folded state, they occupy an area that is 1/10 of the area when they are unfolded. And more interesting than that, they manage to do it without a special mechanical actuator acting over all different parts of the wings, but just they push or pull the wings, and with that they fold and unfold. And so inspired by these and other examples, what people have been trying to do is to develop a new class of materials that are still responsive and that use fold in some way to change their shape. But folding and the mechanism of folding strongly depends on the length scale that we are looking at. So at the nanoscale, like for example in protein folding, the interaction between the atoms is relevant, and we know that the energy landscape is quite rough with a lot of local minima. But when people believe that the native folded state of a protein corresponds to a global minimum of the energy landscape. So somehow the mechanisms that lead to folding are mainly related to thermodynamic forces. So we are looking to the minimum free energy of the system. In the other side of the spectrum, at the centimeter scale, the mechanisms of folding are essentially stress release. And this implies that not only the folded state is unique, as also the kinetic pathway towards this folding state is pretty much deterministic. But in between, if we go to the micron scale, then the interaction between the different elements is mainly excluded volume interaction. And since the fluctuations play a relevant role, then the process is stochastic, and in many times, instead of getting the targeted structures, what we get is some kinetically trapped structure. And this, as I said, raises some theoretical challenges. From the technical point of view, from the technological point of view, the challenge is to program where the material will fold. And there are different strategies to do that. Here I show 3 different examples. For example, one of the things you can do is to combine materials with different stiffness. For example, here, what you have is a stiff material with something that is soft in between, in this case, a swelling gel, that when you increase, for example, humidity, then it will swell, and because it swells, then due to the geometry of the stiff layer, it will bend, and the place where it will bend can be pre-programmed in the material. The second possibility is, for example, to use some kind of material that is sensitive to light and will absorb some kind of some type of radiation. Because of that, it will locally increase the temperature, will melt the material in that region, and once again, you localize where it is going to fold. And you can also do the same with a shrinking material that is strongly bound to the substrate, and once again, you can define multiple events. So from the theoretical point of view, the problem or the challenges are mainly related to the inverse design problem of defining how to obtain these 3-dimensional structures. So let me consider for simplicity a convex polyhedron, and from this point on I will only talk about convex polyhedron. And so the idea is that you form this 3-dimensional shape by folding some 2-dimensional template that we call a net, that consists of rigid panels, and these panels, they correspond to the faces of the polyhedron that are connected through flexible hinges. So one way to obtain this net is by cutting edges of the original polyhedron until you obtain a 2-dimensional structure. And this is what is called the edge unfolding. And so in the end, you generate a net where the perimeter of the net corresponds to the edges that were cut in the original polyhedron. And the properties of the net are, first, that it needs to be a simply connected piece. The second is that it's a union of polyhedron faces. And the third one is that they should not overlap. And though people have been representing 3-dimensional polyhedron using nets for about 500 years, it's still unclear if for every convex polyhedron there is a net. And so this is one of the open questions, that if there is a net for every convex polyhedron. And people believe that yes, but the only argument that they have in favor is just the fact that so far nobody managed to find a polyhedron that cannot be open or cannot be represented as a net. The second challenge is related to the folding. So
could you just say the last? You didn't say anything about the last point you made.
The fact that it's not self-overlap?
Yes.
So basically what you want is that the panels in the end, they will not overlap.
Is that not guaranteed, or am I missing?
Well, so once again, so far for the case of convex polyhedron, this is, there's no example where they overlap, but there is no formal proof that this is always the case. But in the case of concave shapes, then the story is significantly different, as you can imagine. Yes.
It doesn't seem to be connected, this net that you showed. Or you mean by connectedness something else? Because there are two uses.
Connected means that you can go from one face to the other through connections. Forget the red dots, they mean a completely different thing. I will talk about that later, okay? Yes. Okay, so the second challenge is related to the folding itself, okay? So take, for example, the simplest case of a cube. It has 11 non-isomorphic nets. And the question is, which one is the best one to fold, to self-fold at the microscale to lead to this shape? And this is an open question. Basically, the question is, how can we identify which one of these 11 nets will be good to obtain the cube. So this is what I call an end-to-end problem. But the problem is that when you go to the lab and you do experiments, and I will talk a bit later about experiments, and when you do numerical simulations, you see two different things. The first one is that different nets might misfold, and instead of obtaining the targeted structure, you get something different. But worse than that, the same net with different experimental conditions can fold into completely different shapes. Okay? And so the point is that instead of having an n-to-1 problem, we have n-to-n, and we don't know what is the number of n. Okay? So those are the challenges. And so what people have been trying to do is to identify topological, geometrical properties of the nets that could predefine if this structure is better to fold than any other one. And this is what Mendes and collaborators have done. What they did was an experiment where they connected panels of 300, they have 300 micrometers inside, metallic panels through some solder. And so they formed nets of different structures to obtain different polyhedron. And what they did was to compare two different properties of the net. One was what I call topological compactness, that is the number of single vertex connections. So single vertex connections are vertex that are connected, that they only had a cut associated to it. So basically it means that you have two panels that will join, and this is enough to close all the cuts related to this vertex. And you compare that with the radius of gyration, okay? So, and the radius of gyration is what they call geometric. So what they did was they synthesized different nets for the same polyhedron, and they compared the efficiency of folding of each one of them. So basically they do it on a substrate, on a silicon substrate, and then they heat up the system above 180 degrees, and when they do that, then the solder will melt, and because of that, the bonds will become flexible. And since they also have solder on the edges that were cut, then if two of them come together, then they will bind to each other, okay? And so what they do is that they heat up, this goes out of the substrate, this starts to fold, and they generate, and they see it folding, and in the end they compare the different final states. So what they did was for each of the polyhedron, they took 6 different nets. 3 of them are related to the radius of gyration, the one with the maximum radius of gyration, the minimum and the intermediate value, and the same for the vertex connections. And so they let them fold, and they compare, and they classify, they did 50 samples for each case, and they classify the final state based on the number of defects. So if there was no defect, they classify it as A. If the angles were only deviating from the target ones by 20 degrees, then it's B, it's what they call minor defects. And then if they deviate more than that, then they call it defective. And so what you see here is just for the case of the dodecahedra. What they did was to compare what was the percentage of A's, B's, and C's, here increasing the vertex connections, and here decreasing the radius of gyration. And they did the same for the other ones. So what they systematically observed is that looking to the number of vertex connection is more efficient than looking to the radius of gyration. Okay? So the efficiency of folding is much more correlated with the number of vertex connection rather than the radius of gyration. Okay? And the question, so the problem is, in order to identify what are the nets that maximize the number of vertex connections, what they have been doing is basically generating the configurations at random, counting the number of vertex connections, and with that, check which one maximizes the number of vertex connections. But as you can imagine, do it at random is quite inefficient, especially if you go to very large structures. So what I would like to show you today is that with our strategy, you can identify the net that maximizes the number of vertex connections in a deterministic way using graph theory. So for that, let me define 2 different graphs. In fact, I will define 3 of them. The first one is represented in black, is what I call the shell graph, where the nodes are the vertexes of the polyhedron, and the links are the edges. We can also define the face graph, where the nodes are the faces of the polyhedron, and the links connect two faces that share an edge. So what you want to do in order to make it plain, if you assume that all, so what you want to do is to cut links from the shell graph in order to open the structure and form the net. Okay? So what you want is to obtain a cut graph that should be a subgraph of the shell graph. But you needed to do it according to some constraints. The first one is that if you assume that all vertices have non-zero curvature, then your subgraphs, your cut graph, should visit all the nodes. So all vertex should be related to some cut in order to guarantee that you locally open and you have at the end a zero local curvature. The second thing is you need to keep the connectivity between the nodes in the face graph. So this means that your cut graph should be loopless. Because if you close a loop, then it means that you remove a face. Okay? So, and the third thing is that it should be simply connected because you want to guarantee that the perimeter of the net corresponds to the edges. So this means that you can only have a single component in your graph. Okay? So this means that what you want is a spanning tree. Is a tree that visits, that is loopless by definition because it's a tree, and visits all nodes in the shell graph. So now going to the vertex connections. What is a vertex connection? A vertex connection is a vertex that has only a single cut. So in terms of graphs, this means that is basically a leaf of the graph. Okay? So what we are looking for, if we are trying to maximize the number of vertex connections, what we are looking for is to the maximum leaf spanning tree. And so this can be obtained in a deterministic way. There are many algorithms from computer science how to obtain a maximum leaf spanning tree. And so with that, we managed to identify in a deterministic way what is the optimal net to fold to a certain three-dimensional structure. Let me show you some examples. So here, what we have is a tetrahedron that has 4 faces, 9 edges, and with our method we managed to find the 4 maximum leaf spanning trees, and we can even compare if they are isomorphic or not, and we realize that in fact there is only one non-isomorphic net to form a tetrahedron, and this is basically the one that I'm representing here. The second thing is related to the dodecahedron. In this case it's 12 faces, 30 edges, and 1,980 maximum leaf spanning trees, but only 21 of them are non-isomorphic. And as you increase the number of faces and number of edges, for example, if you go look to the Robi-Kubo octahedron, what you see we have is 26 faces, 48 edges, and in this case we have 1,536 maximum leaf spanning trees, where 32 of them are non-isomorphic. But what is interesting is that if we plot the ratio or the fraction of spanning trees that are maximum leaf spanning trees, what you observe is an exponential decay with the number of edges. So this means that if you take, for example, the case of the dodecahedron that has 5 million spanning trees, only 1,980 of them are maximum leaf spanning trees. So the previous methods, just based on random generating the spanning trees, would imply that on average you need to generate 2,500 spanning trees in order to find one maximum leaf spanning tree. So forget random methods, they are practically impossible to use for these cases. In fact, we have an explanation for this exponential decay. Let me give you a brief idea how we can understand this exponential decay. So if you look to the number of spanning trees, what is a spanning tree? Is a tree that goes through all the nodes. So this tree will have v minus 1 edges, where v is the number of vertex in the polyhedron. Okay? So if you want to have an upper bound for the number of spanning trees, this is basically v minus 1 combinations of e possible edges from the polyhedron. This is an upper bound. You can do the same for the number of maximum leaf spanning trees. If you know the number of leaves, then you know that you have v vertexes. So once again, the maximum number of maximum leaf spanning trees is a combination of L leaves out of v vertexes. I will not go into details, but you can show that L scales with the number of edges, V is also linear in the number of edges, and if you do that and you calculate the ratio, then you get an exponential decay, and this is the red line, as you can see, at least for the polyhedra with edges up to 100, it describes quite well the behavior that we obtained by measuring directly the properties. The advantage of our method is that you get a full list or the complete list of spanning trees or maximally spanning trees. So you can apply a second criteria. And you can see what will be the second criteria, how it will depend on the second criterion. Here, for example, I'm looking to the radius of gyration. That was something that was also done in the experimental work. And so what they did here experimentally was to take the ones that maximize the maximum number of vertex connections, and you have different nets with the same number of vertex connections. So from those, they took the one with the maximum radius of gyration, intermediate radius of gyration, and minimum radius of gyration, and they analyzed the impact of the radius of gyration, and they see that if you fix the number of vertex connections and you compare for different radius of gyration, you see an increase in efficiency by decreasing the radius of gyration. And you can do the same in our case. We did it for the soccer ball, and what you can see is that if you take, in this case, I'm just taking the 4,114 non-isomorphic maximally spanning trees, and I'm comparing the radius of gyration as a function of the rank in the radius of gyration. And what you see is that you also have a fast increase in the beginning, meaning that at random it is very difficult that you'll generate the configuration that maximizes the number of vertex connections and also the number or minimizes the radius of gyration. Here are just three different examples. Here is the one with the lowest radius of gyration, the maximum radius of gyration, and for some intermediate value. Another thing that we have been doing is to do some numerical simulations to follow the kinetic pathways, because here we are just assuming that once you select the correct or the optimal net, it will fall to the structure that you want. And the simplest numerical model that we have for this system is to take our net and represent it by a set of particles. We have two types of particles, the blue and the red ones. The blue, they correspond to the vertexes of the polyhedron. The red ones, they correspond to the centers of the faces. They are there just to avoid that two faces cross each other. And so what we have is an attractive interaction between the vertex in order to close the structure where these two nodes meet. And the red ones, they have a repulsive interaction. The simplest way to describe that is to use a Yukawa type potential for the repulsive interaction between the faces, and also an inverted Gaussian potential for the short range attraction between the nodes. And
Can I ask a question? In what you described before, if the vertices touch, they can detach also and find the optimal solution. While in the experiment with the solder, when they touch, then it solidifies, and that vertex is not open to proceeding.
But before I'm just trying to
Is that right?
Yeah, no. Before I'm just trying to identify the net. Okay, so I'm not looking to the dynamics. I'm going to the dynamics now.
In this case, you could have when they touch, the interaction is so strong.
This is what I'm doing.
Basically,
this is what I'm doing. I'm using here an attractive potential where the value of the energy well is such that within the time scale of the simulation, you will not see that detention.
So when they touch,
they stay together. As in the experiment.
From the mathematical solution.
Well, in the mathematical solution, the only thing you want to find is what is the net that maximizes the number of single vertex connections. That's why it's not the full story. You did not look into the dynamics to see what are the kinetic pathways and how long they will take to generate. And this is what I'm going to discuss now. Okay, thank you. So basically, as I was saying, we have a strong attraction, but it's short range, and this can be parameterized because it's a Gaussian potential, so I can play with the width of the potential and the deepness of the potential. Okay, so with that you can do simulations. You see cases where it folds properly, other cases where you have misfolding. And so what we did, I'm just going to show you one example. This is the simplest one. We took the the cube, we analyzed the 11 non-isomorphic nets, and we followed the dynamics. And even there, we found already some interesting things. And so what I'm plotting here, so what we do is we did 200 samples for each case. We can do more, but some preliminary results. And then we rank them. We just look to the final state and we ask, did it close perfectly or not? So if it managed to close perfectly, we counted. We count the percentage of samples where it closed in a perfect manner. So we did not divide like in the case of the experiment. For us, either it folds efficiently or not. And so we ranked 11 configurations based on the efficiency of folding. This is what we have on the horizontal axis, and we correlate that with the maximum number of vertex connections or with the maximum radius of gyration. Okay, and so with that we managed to take the top 3 configurations, are these ones. And so these are the ones that maximize the width. So percentage of samples that manage to close within the time scale of the simulation in an efficient way. But there is no, when we optimize something, we need to define for what are we optimizing the problem. So in this case, we look to the width, but we can also look, for example, for the time it takes to close. And so when you do that for the time it takes to close, when you look to the folding time, then you get a different rank. And so in particular, you see that the one that folds faster is not in the top 3 of the ones that fold in the most efficient way. Okay, so what you can see that in this case, though it ranks as first in terms of folding time, it ranks 4th in terms of percentage of yield. And this is just for the cube. We expect that when you go to other polyhedra, then you'll get probably a different or a more complex behavior. So these are open questions. So what happens now if we try to optimize in terms of folding time? What are the kinetic pathways? And these are the type of things that we want to study now. So just to summarize, folding is an end-to-end problem where you have many challenges related not only to identify what is the optimal net, but also to characterize the folding process and what are the kinetic pathways, how it will depend on the experimental conditions, how to quantify misfolding and things like that. There are many open questions there. So far what we managed to show is that finding the nets that maximize the number of single vertex connections, it's possible to do this in a deterministic way by using graph theory, because it corresponds to the maximally spanning tree of the shell graph, and that our method provides a unique and optimal solution. And since we get the complete list, then we can apply other criteria and try to check what happens now, what will be the second criteria in order to optimize the process. So thank you very much for your time, and then we can look for questions.
Very nice. Questions?
I had a question about the solder experiment, but I think it sort of looks towards your simulations as well. Why should the thing that's lying flat fold? Because the solder along its edges softens.
Yeah, okay, so in our case, we neglected any kind of hydrodynamics. In their case, what they have is a fluid that is shaking, okay? And because of that, the fluid will interact with different panels, will force the system to fold.
So they're shaking the
liquid, they are moving the liquid. They don't explain exactly how they do it, but they are moving the liquid, and this forces the material to fold. You have a second effect that is also the fact that they are the solder is a molten state. That's your surface tension that probably is also promoting the folding at a local level.
Yes, so that you would have more the attraction of an edge closing,
exactly,
rather than a vertex.
Exactly.
Meeting.
You have this additionally.
And I just wonder whether that offers a more complex route through this dynamic.
Definitely, I believe so. So in our simulations, to start with a simple thing, what we did was saying, okay, you just have some thermostat that is interacting with the particles, so you have some random motion of the panels that results from that. But the reality is a bit more complicated. I agree with you that probably you have some kind of long-range interaction or hydrodynamic effects that will help to fold it.
That, to my instinct, would help. It would favour the small radius of gyration ones rather than the large.
Yeah, but what is interesting, it's true, and even more than that, will favor the cases of the single vertex connections.
Yes.
But see that in our simulations, we have neglected that, and still we see that the single vertex connections strongly correlate with the efficiency of closing. But what is interesting is when you look to the folding time, then radius of gyration is much more important. And if you look into these results, I confess that we have no enough time yet to digest them, but you see that it really strongly correlates. If you look to the rank in the folding time, as how it correlates with the minimum radius of gyration, you have much better behavior than when you look to the other. So there are a lot of open questions. This is just a slide.
In the numerical simulation, you can change the number of sticky points.
Yes.
But if one had the experiment in mind, wouldn't it be more reasonable to have, rather than a point-point Yukawa type, have a kind of dispersive Hamaker type interaction?
Yes.
So you have that the shape of the leaf would matter.
Affect more.
Or you could emulate that by having a continuous distribution.
Exactly.
of
What
sticky
you,
points.
or you can
Okay.
exactly you can make is a chain of points.
Yeah, but
along the edge.
that would be
Yes.
expensive. But if you have this,
For example,
you could have center of a leaf interacting with the center of a leaf with the kind of, and that would be very different. The type of dispersion would be different. Sheet to sheet is -1/r,
Exactly.
and sphere is, you know, every shape.
Well, if you assume that is some kind of
If I
static
assume that
interaction. This is what I
No,
mean.
dispersive.
Okay.
It's always attractive. Dispersive
Okay.
is always. It's kind of is a Lacquili type of.
Mhm.
And that would be simple to model because you would have
Yeah, definitely.
leaf instead of point. And
We
that
decided
would-
to start with a very simple model because we wanted to understand what are the key mechanisms that are there. But yes, it's true that you can make it more realistic and more system dependent, depending on the
This very
experiments that you want to compare.
Questions? So why is this Kirigami and non-origami?
Because you can cut. So in origami, you start with a paper and you can only fold.
No,
if you can
because I
cut,
don't see the cuts.
but if you can cut
Yeah.
and you can
Alright.
glue it, then it's kirigami. It's no
Oh,
longer.
fair enough.
Though people have called it in the literature.
Yeah.
It's
Very nice.
being picky about the names.
Do we have more questions? No?
No.
Then,
Okay. Thank you very much.
thanks, Nuno, and thanks for